Hello and welcome back to my writing vlog series. I'm still working on my novel, Nature's Culling, and as usual, I think it's going okay. I'm recording this on the 21st of May 2026, and in this video I'm going to work on chapters 20 and 21, and those are the pinch and the darkest point plot points. I've run into a bit of a problem in this novel because what I have in my outline for this chapter and the next one is not going to be what I'm actually going to write, and so I have to come up with something new. I talked about this in the previous writing vlog as well, because I made an outline, but my story has changed along the way, and so I need to come up with something else that can fit into the story instead of what I had in my outline originally. But I can read you the outlines I have for chapter 20 and 21. The outline for chapter 20 is: they buy a new house together. The male MC is kind of relieved to move away from the house that just reminds him of the late female MC. So I can't really write that because it doesn't fit in with what I have written earlier. And now that Kenny is going to date Pamela, it's only natural that I follow up on what happens with that. And I don't think that they would move away. Maybe they would buy a house together eventually, but only when they're old and gray and don't want to take care of this ranch. But I don't think that will happen either. But I made a strike through of this outline that I had originally for this chapter, and then instead I wrote, Kenny won't leave the ranch. It's his life's work. It belonged to his dead parents. Ranching is all he knows. He wouldn't move away from the ranch, so think of something else. That's basically notes for myself, so I need to write something else in this chapter, and that is what I'm going to do. So the next logical step is to follow up on what happened previously, and that is that Kenny and Pamela talked about how they feel about one another and that they're going to go on a date. The logical step is to then go to this date and then follow along and then see how it's going, and then maybe, I don't know, I don't think that I will let the date take place at the ranch because they have to go away from the ranch in order to fully relax and be present and just be with each other. And if it took place at the ranch, then Charlotte would be there and maybe it would be weird. So they have to go into town, go to a restaurant or something, and then have that date. Oh, I just got an idea. Maybe he and Pamela actually run into this Violet character. I think I named her Violet. There was a Sarah and there was a Violet. And this Violet character is the one who was ready to just leave the city and come and work for him for free at the ranch if they could just be man and wife. So that was a bit too intense for Kenny. But I'm thinking that maybe Kenny and Pamela go into town to have this date at a restaurant, and then they happen to meet this Violet character who wants to be with Kenny. Maybe she will cause a scene or something, I don't know. Maybe that won't be the focus of that chapter, but I will see. I will think of things as I write, because I don't really have an outline for this chapter that I can use. I need to come up with something on the fly. But yes, that is going to be the pinch plot point. For chapter 21, the darkest point chapter, I had this old outline. The male MC's new girlfriend/wife tells him that she's pregnant. The male MC is gutted. He doesn't understand why it happened. They were very careful and they agreed that they wouldn't have any children. The new girlfriend either lied about not wanting children or she has changed her mind. She wants to have the baby. And she also wants to have it even though it means that someone in either his or her family will die when the baby is born. So that was the old outline. I made a strike through of almost all of it. So I'm thinking that the last part of this old outline is going to be included in this new version, or this version of the story that I'm actually writing, because Pamela is going to take over this role of the woman that Kenny finally met, that he wants to be with. So from she wants to have the baby and onward, it's just 2 sentences. But from there and then onward, then it's Pamela who's going to be involved in this story. And I made an additional note to this outline, and I wrote, both Kenny and Pamela want to have a child. They also still want to have a baby together, even though it means that someone in either his or her family will die. So that is the same. So Pamela is going to be this woman that she has always been, but now that she's going to be with Kenny, I'm thinking that I'm going to follow part of the story from her POV. Maybe it won't be this chapter, but the next one. I have to decide on whose POV I'm going to follow in this one. Maybe I should pick Kenny for the previous chapter, chapter 20, and then choose Pamela for this chapter. So all of this about what she's thinking and feeling, I can only tell that part of the story if I'm actually telling the story from her POV. And so this thing about her wanting to have a child no matter what is going to be hard to tell if I tell it from Kenny's point of view. Yeah, there we have it. It's going to be a bit troublesome to write these 2 chapters, but my idea for the previous chapter is that Kenny and Pamela go on this date, and then maybe or maybe not I will include this Violet character who comes over, and maybe, oh, now you're going on a date with someone new, you're busy, huh? And then, I don't know, maybe she makes some kind of scene, or maybe Kenny is just embarrassed and does not want to look at her or something, I don't know. I'm going to have to figure out a specific scene, but I think I will open the chapter with them ordering some food, or maybe they go into the restaurant and then they have to get a table and order something to eat. Maybe I should just skip a bit farther than that, maybe. And then have them be in the middle of the date and talking about things. I don't know. I need to find the right place to start the scene, and I need to find out what they're actually going to do and what they're going to talk about. But I hope that it will come to me naturally as I write. As I mentioned earlier, I can use part of the old outline for chapter 21, but I need to change things. I need to include Pamela and have this specific character be the vessel for what is going to happen in this chapter, instead of just some woman that Kenny met. So it makes sense to me that I'm going to include someone that I have already mentioned before and that the readers know. The Darkest Point chapter is a bit tough to write, because it's when the characters, or the main character at least, feels very low and it doesn't seem like things can get any worse. But I don't know if that is actually going to fit with what I have in my outline, that this thing that they really want to have the baby no matter what is going to be the darkest point isn't really the darkest point if they agree on it. And then, oh, okay, we will just do that, and then everything is fine, and we don't care if someone else dies because we have a baby. So that is selfish. But I want Pamela to have this baby, and I want Kenny to have this baby, so I need to think of something else that makes this part of the story the darkest point. Maybe Charlotte is going to play a role in that then, because she's kind of like, maybe she feels overlooked or something. Or maybe she's very jealous, and maybe she's like, why can't you choose me, or something. I don't know. The darkest point has to mainly be about the main character. And the only constant through the story has been Kenny, so I think it needs to revolve around him. So how the story can be the darkest point in his point of view. Oh, I mentioned earlier that maybe I'm going to write this chapter from Pamela's point of view, but then it's not really about Kenny directly. Indirectly it is about him too, of course, because they're together. They have to maybe not disagree directly, but they have to be at odds with one another, if that is the right term. They have to agree that they want this, but there's something that needs to stand in the way of them getting what they want. So I'm not sure what that is going to be, but I guess I will find out when I actually write this chapter. But yes, that is going to be a bit tricky, as I said, but I'm going to start writing on this novel now, and then I'll get back to you and then tell you how it went, and what I wrote. See you in a bit. Hello again. It's about 3 hours later and I have now written these 2 chapters. For chapter 20 I wrote 3,272 words, and for chapter 21 I wrote 3,632 words. So in total that's 6,904. I spent 1 hour and 15 minutes writing the first chapter and 1.5 hours on the second chapter. So I have been pretty productive today in regards to writing on my novel. Before I actually started writing on this novel today, I was like, okay, the outline bits I have for these 2 chapters is not something that I can actually use, or I could use a bit of it. But then when I actually wrote it, I ended up using something else for the part for chapter 21 that I thought that I could use. I came up with an entirely new scene for chapter 20, and that is that Pamela and Kenny are out on their first date. So it's later the same day after they have taken the rest of the day off in the previous chapter. So it follows naturally after that. So they're out on this date and they're talking, and it's basically about them talking, and then the waitress comes over to take their order, and Pamela is clearly flirting with Kenny right in front of the waitress, and the waitress gets kind of embarrassed and she just hurries off. But it's basically about them talking and figuring out what they're going to do. And Pamela has this kind of hesitation because she really likes Kenny and she wants to live with him at the ranch, but she can't really picture herself living at the ranch and working there for the rest of her life. So she's like, do you really want to stay there for always? Would you like to move to a different house so we can live there and just chill and not have to do ranch work? But Kenny's like, no, I'm never going to leave the ranch. It's my life's work, or rather it's my parents' life's work, and I'm not going to abandon it. But Pamela is like, she feels like she has kind of taken over Penny's role, and she has in my story, but she has kind of filled the hole in Kenny's heart that Penny left behind. And so she's like, okay, you live in that house. I'm not actually sure whether she has moved into the main house and lives there with him now that they're dating, or whether she lives in the secondary house with Charlotte. But I imagine that they live in this bigger house together. And Pamela is like, I miss Penny too, and everywhere I go in that house, things remind me of her, and it has to be even worse for you because it was your wife. But Kenny is like, I still miss her. I think about her every day, but life goes on. He doesn't say that directly, but he's like, I miss her less and less. I think about her a lot still, but it doesn't really take up that much mental space or mental capacity for him anymore. That chapter is basically about them talking. Kenny wants to stay at the ranch, and he can't imagine ever leaving the ranch, and he wants to have a family. He wants someone to be able to take over one day when he can't do it anymore himself. And Pamela is like, okay, but you don't have any children. You don't have anyone that can take over at the ranch, so what are you gonna do? But Kenny is like, I want to have a family. I want to have kids someday. And Pamela wants that too, but she's pretty conflicted. I wrote that chapter from Kenny's POV, so I can't really go into Pamela's head, but from what she's saying, it's clear that she has doubts. She wants to be with him and she wants to live at the ranch, but she's not sure that she wants to stay there forever. So that is potentially a problem later on. So for the second chapter I wrote today, it's a different kind of scene. Some time has passed and Kenny and Pamela have been on several dates since the first date in chapter 20. But some time has passed and they're at Pamela's parents' house. It's Pamela's parents' anniversary. There are only a few other guests present, and it turns out later in the chapter that it's Pamela's aunts and uncles. She has 2 of each. One of each pair is her family. But surprise, it turns out later in the chapter that they're not really her family at all, or after all, because she's adopted. I had this idea that Pamela is adopted, so I went back a bit in that chapter after I had written something about what Pamela's dad says. He's embarrassed of her and he's kind of glad that she isn't his blood. So he's ashamed of her, and he's also ashamed of his own wife because she's getting a bit tipsy, she's drunk, but she likes champagne a bit too much or something like that. She sits and drinks alcohol and she gets drunk and she doesn't really know what's going on. Mr. Lee, Pamela's dad, is like, okay, so you come in here and steal my thunder. He's embarrassed, ashamed of his own wife, but now he's also ashamed of Pamela because Kenny, in the middle of it all, he gets up and then bangs his knife against the glass to give a speech or something to get the others' attention. And then he's like, I don't mean to steal your thunder or anything, but there's something I want to ask. And Mr. Lee, Bernard, is like, okay, what do you want to say? And then Kenny is like, oh, it's not actually something I want to say per se. There's something I want to ask. And then Mr. Lee is like, okay, ask away. But Kenny turns his attention to Pamela and then proposes to her. And she says yes. Mr. Bernard Lee, he's very upset and he's like, oh, you're embarrassing me and you're not my blood and I'm ashamed of you. And then he reveals to everyone, he also outs Candice, who is Pamela's mother. He also outs her and says, oh, she's getting drunk all the time. She's just a drunk. But then he also says that the others know about that. But the others know as well that Pamela is actually bipolar. It's treatable and she is taking medication, but her dad is like, oh, you didn't even know she was bipolar. She has made sure to take her medication then, because otherwise you would know. You have only seen her on her good days, or you haven't experienced her on her bad days. He's kind of very rude and very bigoted, if that's the right word, and he's very down on his own wife and his daughter and Kenny, and he calls Kenny a redneck rancher, and that's not really nice at all. And he's very opinionated, and he's like, okay, if you really insist on marrying this dumb rancher, then you're not welcome in this family anymore. And it all gets heated and they argue, and Pamela tries to get him to calm down, but then she also teases him in a way, because she says, oh, you can't stop me. If I want to marry him, then I'm going to do that. And her dad is like, I'm not having this. It's too much. You embarrass me, and if you really go through with this, you're not welcome in this family. We are cutting you off and you don't get any more money from us. And Pamela is like, I don't need your money. She just wants her dad to love her and respect her. But that's hard because he acts like that. So basically, that dinner doesn't go that well. So the aunts and uncles are just trying to not to intervene, and they don't really say anything. They're just there, and it makes it more awkward. But Pamela and Kenny go into the other room. Her dad got angry and got up and left the room, and her mom got up and staggered after, and she's drunk. She wasn't totally drunk because she gets her 2 cents in anyway. But she goes away, and Kenny's like, okay, I don't know if she's going to talk to her husband or if she's going to throw up or what, but she leaves. And then Kenny and Pamela go into an adjoining room and talk a bit in private in there. And then when they're done, they go back to the aunts and uncles, and Pamela tells them that she's sorry, but they have to leave, and then they leave. I do some telling in that case and not showing. I just briefly sum up that she thanks them for coming, and they thank her for the food and ask her to give her regards to her parents, and then they leave. And then I show a bit again after they have left, where Kenny and Pamela just say their goodbyes to each other. I also reveal in this chapter 21, the darkest point chapter, that she's pregnant. So she hasn't told anyone. She tells Kenny in this chapter, but she says that she doesn't want to tell her parents because she does not want to make her parents think that it's something she has done on purpose to try and force them to accept her decision of marrying Kenny. That scene is pretty emotional too. It's one long scene that changes location a bit, but they end at the front door where Pamela has just seen her aunt and uncles off, and then she talks to Kenny, and Pamela is like, I'm sorry, but I need to stay here for a while and talk to my parents, especially her dad, and she needs to convince him that it's what she wants. She has to stay there and talk to her parents, and there's also stuff that she needs to figure out on her own. And then it's also revealed in this chapter that maybe her parents should get a divorce because they don't really get along. So it's clear in this chapter at least, but Kenny accepts it. He's sad, but he respects her decision, and then he's like, okay, do you promise that you will come back to the ranch? And she's like, I can't promise you anything, but I hope I will come back to the ranch soon. But it's a bit trickier because what is she going to do if she stays at her parents' house? Are they just gonna let her live with them and have the baby and raise the baby there with them instead of accepting her choice of marrying Kenny and letting her go back to the ranch? There's stuff I need to figure out, and especially there's stuff that my characters need to figure out, but the chapter ends with my main character Kenny just getting in his car and driving away. I end the chapter by reading his mind in a way that he's thinking about her and the baby all the way home, and when he reaches the ranch, he's convinced that she will come back to the ranch soon. So he's hopeful. It's the darkest point of the novel. It was the darkest point because they have to be apart for a while, and there's this risk that she isn't going to return. So maybe the darkest point is actually going to be the next chapter. I don't know. I will see what happens when I write this. I tend to add a bit extra on to my novels when I write and when I outline. Along the way I get other ideas, and then the story changes, and now we're here, and before I started writing, I actually looked ahead in my outline bits for the rest of the chapters, and I basically have to scrap the ideas that I have, more or less. Some of the things I can still use, I think, but I need to come up with a different storyline for the rest of the story. But yes, that's it for this writing blog. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I hope you will watch the next one. Until then, take care. Thank you for watching.